It's time for the second Precon upgrade from the Modern Horizons 3 Precon decks, Tricky Terrain, that was led by Omo. So what I want to do here is actually make it so the deck can take advantage of some of the creature type stuff that she does, along with the land type changing that she does for the deck. So let's get down into the deck and see what we can do with Omo. Tricky Terrain is led by Omo, Queen of Vesuva. For 2, a green or a blue. It's a hybrid. Legendary creature, Shapeshifter Noble, that when it enters the battlefield or attacks, put an everything counter on each of one target land and one target creature. Each land with an everything counter on it is every land type in addition to its other types, and every non-land creature with an everything counter on it is every creature type, and it is a 1/5. We're going to use these everything counters to do some silly things in the deck. The primary feature of this deck is to make your lands into all types and get special effects off of lands like Gates, Locusts, or even Urza lands to fire up this deck into big mana spells. But we're also going to go ahead and get some mileage off of a few cards that care about creature types as well, sneaking in some effects that otherwise wouldn't be available in a deck like this, and grant some special abilities usually reserved for specific creature types. The other new commander that comes in the deck is Jyoti, Moag, Ancient. For 2, a green and a blue. It's a legendary creature elemental that says when it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 green forest dryad creature token for each time you've cast your commander from the command zone this game. And at the beginning of each combat, land creatures you control get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is Jyoti's power, and it's a 2/4. So it creates a land creature that can be pumped up, or multiple land creatures, however many times you've cast Jyoti from the command zone this turn. This one plays a little differently, as Jyoti really doesn't care about the whole land and creature type changing thing. Instead, it really just wants to buff up creature lands, so it's better to suit this thing up with things like auras and equipment so that bulks up your creature lands. Now, I'll give a couple recommendations that I think will make this work a little bit better if you want to give this commander a try at the end of the video. For now, let's get into the primary changes for Omo, starting with removing Fog Bank from the deck. This is a terrible card. I used to love it when I first started playing the game, and I can say without a doubt, it is a bad card. Being able to block one thing and then bounce that one thing isn't that great. Instead, I'm going to slot in a creature that will make any creature that we put everything counters on virtually unblockable, and that would be Shifting Sliver. Opponents that aren't playing slivers, well, they're not going to be able to block your creatures that have everything counters on them because they're all counted as slivers. So when you have your 9/9 Terracodon or other large creatures being turned into slivers, they're going to have a big problem on their hands. In that same vein of trying to tap into special creature abilities, we're going to take out Seer's Sundial, which is just a very slow card. It ties up your mana far too much to get the extra cards. And in exchange, we're going to use Hawkball of the Surging Soul. Now, you might say this is not a Merfolk deck. Well, when Omo makes it into anything, all your stuff can be Merfolk, and each creature with the everything counters can then explore off of his trigger, allowing us to churn through cards by either putting lands into our hand or exploring away cards that we don't want to have off the top of the deck. And then, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, this is going to be our third swap for doing the same kind of thing. We're going to take advantage of the creature type changing to get that card in. However, I'm going to be kicking out one of the new cards, Rampant Fragantua. I am not a fan of cards with high demands to actually be good. A 3-mana 3/3 is a floor in Magic these days, and a 3/3 with trample is not exactly that fearsome. Needing an opponent to be dead and gone from the game to actually make this good is a hoop I'm just really not willing to mess around with, and even then, the mill and regrowing of lands off of this is kind of overkill at that point. Instead, I'm going to slot in Merfolk Sovereign. I'm not overly worried about the +1/+1 part. It's the activated ability that makes Merfolk unblockable that I'm after, but this is more of a redundancy to work with the Shifting Sliver we talked about a couple of entries back. But either way, this is a good way to smash through opposing defenses with big monsters. Next up, we're going to cut one of the Planeswalkers, Nissa, Steward of the Elements. This version of Nissa has kind of become the default reprint for most any kind of Simic Precon when they want a Planeswalker in that deck. She's a little thematic here if you run Jyoti up front, since you can use the -6 to temporarily animate lands and use his buff, but we're not running that in this layout. So instead, we're going to cut something that I think would fit thematically with the Vesuvans that Omo leads, Doppelgang. I love clone cards, and this is one of the highest ceiling cloning spells in the game. And the only limitation here is the mana, but in this deck, it's designed to generate a ton of mana to dump into it, so I think it's going to be a great place for this card. Moving along, we're going to scrap Wonderscape Mage and its small draw capabilities in favor of Titan of Litjara. This basically reads, for each creature you control with an everything counter on it, draw a card. Whatever creature type you choose at that point, it doesn't matter. You just pick one and let it rip. I also like that it will give us cards on entering, whereas the Sage, you have to wait to start your drawing and you have to bounce a land in order to do it as well, which then slows you down from getting to the bigger drops down the line. In a deck with things that let you drop multiple land drops per turn, sure, this is a great card, but the Precon was not designed with that thought in mind, and I'm not going to upgrade it just to force this card to actually work well with the deck. Now, our next two cuts are going to get hit for the very same reason. They are both ETBs that look at a clump of cards, you pick a land out, and then you bury the rest on the bottom of your deck, and that's Satyr Wayfinder and Floriferous Vinewall. I cannot pinpoint why, but I just flat out dislike cards that do this sort of thing. I think I've been burned too many times by them, and I end up having to put too many good cards that got mixed in with that clump on the bottom of your deck because you're only allowed to take the land off of them, and I almost rather run just about anything else over these kind of cards. In this case, that anything is going to be Bear Umbra and Monument to Perfection. The Bear Umbra can actually help us keep Omo alive as well as untapping our lands for further casting on our second main on attacks. And the Monument is just a fun include that I think fits nicely in the deck. We're turning our lands into all land types, so eventually we're going to be able to transform this into a 9/9 beater, and that one time that you can use this to poison someone out of a game, you are going to feel like an absolute badass. Now in this next section, something occurred to me as I was searching for cards. The everything counters also make our lands into all basic land types as well, so a little domain is going to make its way into the deck as well. So let's start off by removing Arcane Denial from the deck. It's an alright card, but unless I'm playing a straight control style deck, I'm not a fan of running counter magic in these decks. Instead, I'm going to slot in Briar Hydra. Its domain ability can put +1/+1 counters on any creature once this deals damage, and if you have a way to make it unblockable, then feel free to spread the counters around. Otherwise, I just stack the Hydra itself up first to make sure it can punch through in later turns and spread the counters later on. We're also going to remove the other counter from the deck, Summary Dismissal. For the pedantic out there, yes, I know it's not really a counter, but it is a counter spell in function. Same reasons that I had for removing Arcane Denial apply to this card as well. Instead, I'm slotting in a card that is a blast from my past, Collective Restraint. This is a propaganda on crack. One land getting an everything counter, and this makes it so it costs 5 mana per creature to attack you. I used to play this in all kinds of decks, but I had one particular one that was a Bant toolbox, blue and white and green, and it put in some good work there, and it's going to put in a lot of good work here as well in keeping us alive. The next cut I'm going to make is simply a card I do not like because it gives my opponents a chance at getting something back from the graveyard, and that can bite you in the butt. So Skullwinder is going to get sent packing, and instead I'm going to give Nail Avazoa Aeronaut a chance to show me her worth in the deck, and hitting Domain is actually very trivial with Omo, so it should draw a fair amount of cards throughout a game for us. But what's not going to be drawing us a lot of cards in the Precon is Treasure Cruise. This deck just doesn't seem to cycle through enough cards to get this to be discounted enough to make it worth casting all the time. What the Treasure Cruise really needs is an Impulse Draw from red or some kind of self-mill to use it more effectively, and this deck is just not built that way. Since we're not that kind of deck, I'm going to give the slot to Sphinx of Clear Skies. I opened one of these in my pre-release for Dominaria United and have wanted to find a home for it, and I think this is it. We should be able to get 5 card splits off of this, no problem, and in the end, effectively draw more cards than what Treasure Cruise could with just one swing of the Sphinx. The final couple cards are going to be some big mana spells to use with all the extra mana this deck should be able to churn out. To make room, though, here, we're going to take out Replication Technique. Allowing my opponents to clone something could be disastrous, and this is any permanent on this card, so you have to be wary of gifting a free clone to somebody. Instead, I'm going to spend more mana and use Astral Dragon. It's a way to triple clone something, gives you some flying creatures to hit with, and it just feels more on theme with the deck and to use all that mana with. And then the last cut is going to be Oblivion Stone. This was once a great card, but now it's just really slow and takes a while to get set up. And if you want to sit there and try to save things, you're telegraphing to your opponents and they're going to remove it before you can ever set it off. So in the meanwhile, I'm going to go ahead and use Azuri's Predation. This is Green's quote-unquote board wipe that they have only really ever printed one of, likely because all other green board wipes would just be a variation on Predation. but it's a very strong card and it should leave you some blockers and potential threats behind for later, as well as not nuking your own board in the process. And as I promised at the end of the video, this is what I call the Jyoti Special. These are cards that I would slot into the deck if I were to run Jyoti as the commander. There are many more I would run over things that are in here currently, but this is just a sampling. Things like Dragon Throne of Tarkir and Colossification. These are things to pump up Jyoti, which in turn pumps up the creature lands you have. And to get creature lands, we have a few options, like Tadiova, Steward of the Tides, which can slowly build up your creature lands, or we can just go in one big burst and use something like Sylvan Awakening or Root Awakening, animating all of our lands in one go and making it so that Jyoti can pump them up and go flying at our opponents in a figurative avalanche. So what did you guys think? Let me know down in the comments below. And while you're down there, please like, share, comment, subscribe. All these things help the channel grow as I'm on my road to my first 1,000 subs. And as always, thank you for watching. Have a great day, and we will see you in the next video.